You're listening to Claiming Space, a show that holistically questions our pursuits of new frontiers, centered around the social sciences. In the space industry, Claiming Space features diverse voices and perspectives with a specific focus on digital economies in space ecosystems. We talk to experts from a wide range of sectors in social sciences, technology, and the arts that affect not only our daily lives on Earth, but also beyond, that are parables to each other. I'm your host, Vikram. Today we have Adeene Denton. Adeene is a scientist and historian approaching future planetary exploration from a humanistic perspective. She is a Ph.D. student in planetary geology at Purdue University. She holds undergraduate degrees in geophysics and history from Rice University and a master's in planetary geology from Brown University. Her thesis work focuses on the geologic history of prominent destinations for human and robotic exploration, including the mid-latitudes of Mars and the icy satellites, as the geologic history of these bodies is a crucial aspect controlling resource distribution and accessibility. She has been active in developing a support network for underrepresented students, both within the Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Science at Purdue and across the planetary science community through her work with the Space in Women Conference. She is an avid writer, dancer, and choreographer, creating work focused on the sociopolitical implications of space exploration. In co-founding the Ethics and Human Rights in the Space Sector Project Group for the Space Generation Advisory Council, or SGAC, she's been looking to develop a community centered around non-exploitative relationships with the Earth, space, and any potential non-Earth life forms for the sake of scientific and peaceful collaborative exploration. Hey, Dean, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I'll start with the same question that I ask everyone when they come on to shows, like, what inspired you to get into what you're doing right now? Has it been something like you've always been interested as a child?
So right now I'm a PhD candidate in planetary science. And so I spend most of my time studying Pluto and doing computer simulations and basically blowing it up. That's not necessarily something that I really visualized myself doing as a kid, but I've always found space incredibly intriguing. And I ended up going more towards the space side of things when I was an undergrad.
Yeah.
Prior to my undergrad, I was very humanities focused, very interested in history and social sciences. And I stayed that way through my undergrad. I ended up getting a history degree, but I fell into geology because I took an introductory geology class, and to me, it seemed like the history of the Earth as a history of human occupation of the Earth that I was learning about in my history classes was just a really small part of the history of the Earth itself and the history of the solar system,
Yeah.
which really, really fascinated me. So I just decided to keep probing deeper and deeper into the history of the world around me.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So you're a choreographer, a dancer, and scientist. So how does your work as a choreographer and dancer affect your approach to doing science?
Dance is very interesting. So yes, in my spare time, I do some choreography, and lately I've been working on using the audio files from different NASA missions, both crewed and robotic, and exploring how those soundscapes influence human motion. To me, dance is, because it's so physical, and a lot of the work that I do in science is entirely trapped in my brain, trapped in my body on a day-to-day basis. You know, I am in the computer lab typing on a computer locked into one position. I think exploring physical processes through modeling is very different, but also very similar to exploring those same physical processes through the movement of the human body. And so a lot of the things that I do when I make dances is think about how to represent things like star formation or asteroid impact with one or more human bodies, and it becomes a different way of physically understanding the same concept. And I think it helps me be a lot more creative in thinking about the same kinds of problems.
Okay. All right, cool.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just to explain what this is before I show it to you,
Yeah.
I've lately been trying to explore the legacy of space exploration and what it means,
Yeah.
particularly like, how do I say this? With the anniversary of the Apollo program and that being so fundamental to space exploration in the US and to our kind of mythos as a country at this point,
Yeah.
it's been very interesting to wrestle with it. So this is a piece that I worked on with in collaboration with some of the undergraduate students here at Purdue University to reinterpret the legacy of JFK's speech in particular.
Yeah.
So here's a little bit of that for you.
So what did the movements mean, like with every sort of, how did you come up with that? What was the thinking behind it?
The movements.
Yeah.
So I've built in a series of, okay, I'll stop there for now. So what I gave them was a series of Apollo era photographs from the space program.
Okay.
Of scientists and prep work of the astronauts themselves.
Yeah.
And I had them interpret those spatially.
Okay.
And we also talked about some of the movements that they're doing, like this and this, for example. They also had a series of movements to work with that were based on orbits, satellite orbits, for example. Okay. Things like that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, they do this a couple times. That's what their interpretation of the sound of Sputnik was, okay. the flicking of the hand. Yeah. So it's been really fun to work with these dancers, and some of them are actually aerospace engineers here who just wanted to work with me on this as a new way of thinking about it, which it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh no, that's nice. So what was that one called?
Ooh, what did I? I am one of those artists that struggles with naming things. Yeah, boats leaving a pale blue dot.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I saw the breaking the Roche limit. That was also quite interesting.
Yes, yeah, I'm happy to share some of that with you too. So breaking the Roche limit was actually a solo that I made in conjunction with some folks in New York City back when I did a sort of choreographer incubator program, and thought a lot deeper about, it was very much based on the Apollo 17 mission. Yeah. And it uses audio that was developed by Public Service Broadcasting, which is a British band, not to be confused with the Public Service Broadcasting in the United States. And it's audio from Apollo 17. Yeah. So I can show you a little bit of that now. So the imagery in this one is much more thinking about both the idea, it plays with the idea of circular motion as well as a straightforward journey. So that's why we're beginning with this kind of diagonal going from the back to the front, is thinking about how like space travel is a non-linear process. Our goal is to eventually go from one place to another, but that's not always what happens. And we just end up circling back to the beginning. Rockets explode, machines don't work, we lose funding.
So the goal is like the other point in the room, but your dance is like interpreting as in I'm trying to get to the other part of the room, but like I keep going backwards and
right.
Then, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so this is where I bring in the kind of circular motion.
And is that just a representation of like the, I guess, the chaos that happens with?
So funnily enough,
spiraling?
it's a series of movements that I developed to represent the building blocks of the solar system, because I was thinking about, sorry, that's
yeah, I'll put those up in the show notes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where to stop, but so let me, I can explain that movement a little bit. And thank you for letting me share this art. It's always really nice to be able to talk about it. So the movement that I'm exploring was basically thinking about the building blocks of the solar system. Essentially what I started explaining to you at the beginning of this is thinking about how to represent physical processes with the human body. And as I was thinking about the Apollo program and space exploration is so deeply rooted in the sociopolitical space, but it's also very much rooted in the overall timeline of the solar system and of the universe. And so I was trying to explore where we and I fit into that. So the movements that I'm using for that are this circular motion represents the formation of planets themselves and of planetesimals. This represents, so I have this and this motion, which represents comets, which are believed to be one of the primary sources of water, delivering water to terrestrial bodies. And then this is fairly straightforward. This just the hand smack is the asteroid impact, and then the distribution of the ejecta. So you see me do this a lot.
So that's pretty cool.
Comets, planet formation, asteroid impact, material distribution, and then the last part is the formation of the moons. So that's what I played with, which was a lot of fun.
Cool. So I watched your talk on human culture in space, and your scientific work relates to looking at geologic activity on other planets. So in other words, like you're looking at the historical activity of those planets, right? So would you say that human culture in the form of dance, which is what you explore, is sort of future historical activity that shapes human culture in space?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think, well, dance is something that's very intrinsically human and very tied to how we experience the world in a very physical way. So I think one of the most interesting things I found in addition to being kind of like a history junkie, I'm really interested in the history of space. And so I've gone through lots of footage of what astronauts have done in space. Once they're in a zero-G type environment, they start physically playing with the space around them, and how once you lose your connection to the ground, you have to relearn what it means to physically interact with other things. And they develop a whole new kind of movement vocabulary and entirely new ways of like playing games with each other. So if you look at astronauts on the ISS, for example, they'll do games of like how many times can I spin in a circle kinds of things, and using grabbing onto things with their toes as well as their hands. And I'm really interested in thinking about how they will make dances and inside physical jokes. It's like a choreography of spaces, but it's
Yeah.
also choreography of space, at the risk of sounding incredibly performance theory type jargon.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in how we go from here on, say, their journey to Mars. The journey to Mars is itself 1 year long, but then you get there and Martian gravity is different. And the ways that we will interact with the world around us will change as a result. And dance is such an integral part of the human experience that astronauts on the space station have kept doing it. People will be dancing in these different types of environments, and we'll bring our terrestrial understanding, because everything we do originates in the fact that we were born on Earth.
So one of the things you also, I think you talk, and I think it's similar to what you just said, like right towards probably the end, is how you say, like, we're all part of the same sort of, we're all still part of, like, the planet. And that's when it sort of got cut off, but after that. But then, but you talk about astrohumanism. So could you could you explain or elaborate like that concept and like how that sort of reflected in your dance and choreography?
Sure. So astrohumanism is a term that I developed simply because it's very difficult, because I spent, quite a long chunk of time explaining to you the idea behind dance as one of the ways that dance is a primary carrier of human culture.
Yeah.
Astrohumanism is the idea that our culture and the ways that we interact with each other are fundamentally rooted in the fact that we exist on a terrestrial planet, and on this one specifically.
Yeah.
And when we are transplanted to another place, we carry that aspect of our culture with us. Literally, the human body will remember the fact that we were born to exist on Earth in Earth gravity.
Right.
And that we will then find ways around that in how we move and how we exist. That's astrohumanism, is the idea that something like a physical art form like dance will be the primary site of humans redefining what it means to be human once we're separated from the Earth.
Okay, cool. So you're a co-founding member and head of the Ethics in Space Rights Project Group at the SGAC. Could you tell us a bit about the vision of the project group?
Sure. So the Ethics and Human Rights Project Group within the Space Generation Advisory Council is one of several different project groups that exist within the SGAC. And the SGAC is itself an organization that's affiliated with the United Nations. It's an organization of young people interested in space exploration within the context of the United Nations and what the United Nations does. And so it's a global organization that pulls people from all over the world to talk about space exploration. And some of the other project groups before I co-founded this one are centered around commercial space and what commercial interests have in space itself. There's a space medicine project group, there's near Earth object project group, and space law group, things like that. And so my co-founder and my co-founder is Danny Bednar, who was also a PhD student at the time, but he was a PhD student in geography in Canada. And the two of us came together because I've remained very strongly interested in the human side of things in space exploration, despite being quite firmly, as a result of my PhD work, very focused on the technical aspects of code design, and what it takes to blow up Pluto is very intellectually removed in a lot of ways from the human side of space exploration.
Okay.
And we got to talking about how this is kind of a gap in discussion, in large scale discussions about space exploration, is ethics and human rights. And that's kind of a twofold discussion. The first is thinking about space exploration is a very it's a very heady topic. It's a very complex topic because space exploration, the history of space exploration is very much rooted in nationalism, in competition between countries to establish political and cultural dominance. And in a new era of a much more global consciousness, a lot of people have been thinking about what it means to do space exploration ethically and whether or not that's possible. And many of those people are social scientists who are doing incredible work in the field of STS and anthropology and sociology. Yeah. But those conversations aren't being had by those of us actually doing the science, which is, I think, really frustrating because they're doing incredible work. And it's, Danny and I got to talking because we both read these papers that are published in sociology journals because it's something that we're interested in. But that conversation wasn't really being had outside of people in one-on-one type meetings. So we founded the SGAC to be a place where those conversations can be had, to provide a forum for people to develop projects and ideas surrounding this concept. Yeah. And I mentioned the idea of doing space exploration ethically, but I think the other part of ethics and human rights in space exploration is thinking about the tools that we put in space. For example, the visualization tools that we have in the form of all of these imaging satellites, and thinking about what that means for ethics and human rights concerns on the Earth, and how the ways we're doing space exploration don't just affect how we extend our own values to other locations in the solar system, but how those are reflected back to us by what we put in orbit.
Yeah. All right, yeah, because we've had a few guests on here, like we're talking about ethics, and it's always an interesting conversation to have. And I definitely think like it's a very important conversation to have, like taking social sciences and humanities and arts, like an approach to engineering and sciences. So agreed. Because I remember because I was when I was at SGAC, that group did not exist. So we had, I don't think, 3 or 4 groups back then. That was like maybe 4 years ago or something. So it's good that you have a group like that now. So So how does ethics and human rights fit into a current view of space exploration, and why? I think you pretty much answered that over there. Maybe you could tell a bit more about the members of the group and what drew them. So I think you mentioned one of your members, like co-founders. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would be happy to talk about our group because it's been really exciting to build our group. So we were founded in early 2019. So it's been a 2-year period of Danny and I building this group together. So Danny, my co-founder, is currently working for the Canadian Space Agency. And both of us are transitioning to a more advisory role now to let the team that we've built come together. And we have people who are we have both social scientists, engineers, and planetary scientists all coming together to discuss this as a group, which is, I think, something that's been really, really exciting for us. So we have people like Annie Handmer, who's in Australia doing the history of science and ethics as they relate to society. But then we have people like Eleni Ravanis, who did her master's in planetary science at the University College London and is now doing her Ph.D. at the University of Hawaii, looking at interfacing with the Mars rovers. And that's just an example of 2 people on our team who very much are involved in space exploration from 2 different angles, but are both really interested in the question of ethics and human rights as it relates not just to what they do on a day-to-day basis, but to the overarching question of how do we as individual actors think about this going forward?
Okay, cool. So could you maybe go through some of the projects that are being worked on with the group? Like, and is there something you're
Sure.
particularly interested in, like your favorite?
So I will say before I start, we have 2 major projects going right now, maybe 2.5. And that's primarily because a lot of us would like to do more work, but as a group that calls itself the Group for Ethics and Human Rights, we are working unpaid. We are a group of volunteers interested in talking about this question. A lot of us are academics, but not all of us. And it's been critical for us to develop these projects in a way that's sustainable for the people running them. So the work that we're doing is very much focused on what can we do to move these ideas forward while also ensuring that we treat ourselves ethically in the process. I think that's very important to note, and that's a discussion that we have at each of our meetings, is who is interested in taking on more projects and can you do that feasibly? So the 2 things that we're doing right now are a survey of the SGAC membership, and we're developing an ethics and human rights in the space sector reading list and associated website with that. And I will explain now why those are our first 2 projects, and why I think if you hear me say that, you might think those seem like 2 very easy and very simple projects to do. So why are you doing that? And they are not simple, and I think in some ways they're actually quite profound. I'm about to wax poetic about the power of surveys, and I know everyone hates surveys, and so do I. But we cannot begin to talk about what the SGAC membership is if we don't have an understanding of who's actually involved in the SGAC. The SGAC is an organization, and you can become a member of it quite easily. But ethics and human rights as a new project group is something that we haven't really been discussed at the major SGAC meetings. And we wanted to identify what kinds of work we can do that best addresses what SGAC members are thinking about. And we also, to a basic level, want to understand what do people who, by virtue of being a membership of the Space Generation Advisory Council, who are invested in space exploration, how much are they actually thinking about things like ethics and human rights? What problems are they aware of? And so the survey that we've developed is a survey, it's both a demographic survey, which the SGAC actually hasn't done in the past, and it's also which is, I think the issue of diversity and demographics is very critical to understanding where people are at on the issue of ethics and human rights. So we felt it's very critical to address that piece. But then the other part of it is asking people questions about what they think their priorities are for the future of ethical space exploration. And it's a survey that's open for several months, and then the social scientists on our team will be taking the lead in actually reviewing that data and developing a report from it that we can present at future SGAC events like the Space Generation Congress. And we'll be able to summarize where this international group is at in terms of thinking about these questions, and be able to further direct our efforts and our future projects to addressing that.
Okay.
So that's the survey, and Danny Bednar, my co-leader, was one of the chairs on this project that I worked with, and it was a very difficult thing to do because writing good surveys is actually quite hard. That's why social scientists spend so much time on it. It was very fun to work with him on that, and the survey is still open right now, so we're still collecting that data, and we're going to spend this summer processing it, thinking about it, and how we can best use that data to benefit not just the SGAC community, but the space exploration community as a whole.
And how have you sort of distributed the survey? Like what kind of channels have you used?
So because we are doing a survey of the SGAC membership.
Okay, so it's
and
within the SGAC.
Yeah, so a good way to explain this would be, because we are an SGAC project group, our purview is essentially our purview technically is that we should only be surveying SGAC members.
Right. Okay.
Which means that we're doing this with the full cooperation of SGAC as an organization.
Yeah.
So if you are a member, it is available as soon as you log in. You can take our survey.
Okay.
And members of the group and our social media platforms, we've been advertising it, but we've also had the SGAC advertise it for us and let people know that it is on the website for them to take.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and it's our hope that, you know, SGAC in some way serves as a microcosm for the community.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about getting to process the results.
Okay, cool. What's the other project? I think, because I remember seeing.
Yes, I did. there is another project group. Our second project that we're working on is a reading list covering topics in ethics and human rights in the space sector. And right now we are building a website associated with that.
Okay.
And again, this has been, I think, something that we've been coming at from all angles in terms of what kinds of information that we actually need on the website. It's quite a complex website as a result, but I was just pulling it up to show you, and then I remembered it's not public yet, so I can't show it to you. We're just trying to be one of many resources out there for people looking to learn more about ethics and human rights, just collecting information where we can. So we've developed a reading list website, and on that reading list website, we've tried to break down what is essentially space ethics is really a kind of a difficult topic to wrap your head around, right? Which is, I think, why it's difficult for me to articulate it to you. What does space ethics mean? Well, it's a very far-reaching idea because, as I've mentioned, it affects not just, you know, upwards and outwards, how we're doing space exploration going forward, but also how we reflect back on life on Earth. Right. So our website is designed to be not the resource because there is much more writing about this topic than we can possibly collect, but to be a resource for someone who's interested in trying to get a handle on this question for the first time. So we've broken down some of both academic articles and more pop articles. Members of the team have taken turns reviewing these articles, making sure they're appropriate, understandable, and developing summaries where we can to guide people through a literature that can be really difficult. And so some of the resources that we have on there right now, once this will be public, which should be in the next few months, is talking about one of the major issues on Earth is the presence of space exploration related infrastructure on indigenous and contested lands. For example, the ongoing dialogue surrounding the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea.
Right, yeah.
And the lack of consent by the native people of Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So we have resources surrounding that. We have coloniality and imperialism in outer space as it relates to, say, the US military's efforts to build a moon base and the dialogue surrounding who can and cannot claim territory in outer space with respect to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. We have papers that specifically discuss the militarization of space versus the commercialization of space. Yeah. And environmental ethics as well, because that's another huge part of space ethics that is more, you know, if we send things to Mars, if we send things to Venus, how do we not contaminate those places? If we want to send a person to Mars, is it possible to do that in a way that's not irreparably changing the geosystem of Mars with our presence? So we're just collecting all of those different ideas that are all wrapped up in the bundle of what is space ethics, so that people can see the breadth of thought.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That definitely sounds a list that we need.
Yeah.
I
it's
think
quite an undertaking.
Yeah. We actually had a guest think Dr. Erica Nesvold, you might know, and they have a similar list with their sort of Just Space Alliance.
The Just Space Alliance, yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking with them, and as we've
Yeah.
developed this list, we've been reaching out to people
Yeah.
like Erica and the Just Space Alliance to make sure that we've got we're not getting everything, obviously, but that we're getting as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're also such a good resource. I'm really excited to see people like the Just Space Alliance also in this area doing this work.
Yeah. And then I think like your last project was space technology, SDGs, and fundamental human rights.
Right.
Is that the half project that you
That is the half project, because it's a bit difficult. We're still in the exploration stages, which is why if you go to our website on the SGAC webpage, you will see that we have information about the first two, and there isn't information about the third, because it's something that we're still developing.
Okay. Yeah.
But I can explain a little bit more what that actually means, which is we don't even describe what an SGG is. So that's because it's actually quite difficult to edit the SGAC website as a single person.
Okay.
If you've had to do website editing for something like quite a large website, it's actually quite difficult.
Yeah.
It's much different from, say, maintaining a WordPress for a single thing, which is what our reading list will be. But right, so the SGGs that we're talking about developing something in concert with are the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals that were developed by the UN as a blueprint to achieve a more sustainable future. And so an example of some of those goals are the development of sustainable cities and communities, the development of reduced inequality, and protecting and restoring ecosystems on land and in the ocean.
Yeah.
And this is fundamental to the UN. And one of our primary goals as a project group has been thinking about how the SGAC relates to the United Nations as a whole. And so we've been discussing ways that we can explore those SDGs through the lens of space exploration and space ethics. Yeah. And that ties a lot more to how we can use the technologies that are currently in orbit and future plans for maintenance of things in orbit to interface with and observe the Earth and its people. Okay. But we're still thinking about how we can actually coordinate with the UN on that. We have ideas, but it's something that's currently in progress. It will be really exciting once we decide exactly how we're going to explore that. But I do think that returning back to the roots of SGAC as a UN affiliated organization is, I think, really crucial for framing our thinking about space exploration. So that was what motivated this project.
Okay, all right, cool. So is there like a book or a podcast or anything you could recommend you found useful in your sort of like journey so far, like doing what you're doing?
Ooh.
There'd be a lot, or not.
That's an interesting question. So you may or may not find this useful to you. I don't necessarily spend my spare time listening to podcasts about space exploration. I do sometimes. Like, I think I can tell you the podcasts that I have bookmarked that I want to listen to and haven't done, which are fantastic probably, and I haven't listened to them. Because doing this work is very tiring, and I tend to spend the rest of my time thinking about dance instead. Yeah. I don't have podcast recommendations as a result. Book recommendations. Dr. Alice Gorman is a space anthropologist. You may have heard of her. You may have had her on the show.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. I loved her book. Dr. Space Junk versus the Universe is a great book.
Yeah.
I have books surrounding me right now on my floor and such, thinking about other options. I really think that it's funny to say I've put together this reading list and I can't recommend a single thing to you. That's because most of it is articles and not books or podcasts. The most useful way for me to do the work that I do and to improve these kinds of discussions has really been the meetings that we have and talking to other people about it.
Okay.
I don't think that's why we're building a collection of articles rather than saying this is the best thing that I can point you to. There is no single resource that can do that. It's the interconnectedness of the world, right? That we all end up realizing when we start digging into something like social science or history. When our project group meets and we talk together about these issues, that is when I move my own thinking forward the most. I learned so much more by talking to social scientists as well as other scientists and engineers who are thinking about the questions of space ethics than when I read an article specifically, because the idea behind gathering knowledge is to use it. And the idea behind developing our project group is to use that knowledge in a community. So that's where I think I've found the most value.
Okay. Yeah.
Which may not be helpful to your listeners who would like to listen to a podcast. So I'm sorry about that.
But like you pretty much alluded to networking, I guess, in some way.
Yeah. I think
so. In other words, quite important. If you want,
I think of networking less of like finding people that can help you get a job in space or what have you, and more of
helping evolve your ideas.
And who do you want to talk to? Who do you want to learn from? You can read their work, and I do. We have tremendous scholars on the team, like Natalie Trevino, who's a recent Ph.D. graduate in the history of space science, and I've read her work. But it's so much more fun to continue the process by talking to her directly and talking about how we can implement the ideas that she's developed in her writings to apply it to different aspects of the space exploration community.
Okay, cool. So before we conclude, if listeners wanted to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I have a website, which is adeenedenton.com. You can find more information about the science that I do and the dance that I do on my website. I have a Twitter, which is at Space Whale Rider, inspired by the Star Trek movie with the space whales. And if you do want to email me, you can reach me at adeene.denton@gmail.com if you would like to ask me any questions directly. And yes, that is me.
Cool. Thanks, Dean, for taking the time to come on Claim Space.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Adeene Denton, co-lead of the Ethics and Human Rights in the Space Sector Project Group for the Space Generation Advisory Council. All the deets for this episode will be on our blog. Until next time, stay safe out there, and thanks for your time. See you later. If you've made it all the way to the end of the show, then a really big thank you. If you're interested in being a patron for the show, you can find Claiming Space on Patreon, Anchor, and Audius platforms, where you can contribute as little as $1, as this would help with improving the show. I appreciate the time you've taken to listen to this episode and hope there's some informative content for you. If you'd like to hear more, suggest improvements, or guests, please let me know via the website's feedback form. If you could please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, subscribe, like, rate, and review it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or any other platform you use, as this would help the algorithms and let people know we are out there. Until next time, see you later.